Okay, we are live. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a joy to be with you for day 5 for this first week's series of studies. Welcome to those of you who are remoting in on Zoom, and we're looking forward to wrapping up this week's series of lessons on Saul and David and the law of the lid. Friday sessions are different than the Monday through Thursday, in that Friday is more of a review and application orientation rather than new events. So with that, we're going to get started here. We got some technical issues going on at the time, but here we go. So all along this week, our first leadership principle, known as the law of the lid, very simply says leadership ability determines a person's level of effectiveness. And that's been the premise for the whole week. And I think it's a very powerful statement that the more we can increase our leadership skills, the more effective we will be in whatever endeavor we're looking at. And so you may remember these next 4 statements that I'm going to share with all of you. The first statement, every person has the potential to become a leader. Every leader has lids. Some lids can be lifted by the leader, and few leaders let others lift lids in their lives. Do you remember these statements? If you don't, that's okay. These are actually the 4 leadership principles that start every session. So with that then, as you remember, we had both a leadership thought for the day, and here the 4 are for the entire week. Every person has the potential to become a leader. We start there because we want people to know that it's not the case that you're either born a leader or you're not. That if you don't have the right pedigree, you don't have the right background, you don't have the right training, that there's nothing that you can do. We looked at David and we looked at Saul and we looked at their respective backgrounds, and you never would have thought that David would have been a leader because he came from a very ordinary background, unlike Saul, whose father was a very prominent person, and Saul, as you remember, stood head and shoulders, quite literally, above everyone else, and was the most handsome person in all of Israel, as the scriptures tell us. And so you would think, just by those kind of characteristics alone, that Saul would have been the great leader and David never would have amounted to anything. But as it turns out, of course, there's other principles, and we have discussed those. Every leader has lids. By that we mean characteristics or aspects to them, some of them internal, some of them external, that can be like a lid over the top of them that would prevent them from being everything they can be. Fortunately, the news doesn't stop there, because some lids can be lifted by the leader. That's what we looked at on Wednesday, that we're not powerless to, okay, well, we got these lids, there's nothing we can do about it. But instead, we have the opportunity to grow professionally, personally, and we can remove some of those leaders then by our intentional action. And then yesterday, we highlighted the fact that all of us might have some lids that we cannot remove ourselves. We need someone else to do it for us. Think of you find yourself in a situation that you don't have very much experience in. And so you rely on someone who has a lot more experience than you in that particular area, and they can help you then get up to speed, that kind of thing. So some lids we can remove ourselves, but other lids take someone else working with us in order to lift those lids. And I shared the story yesterday of a pastor friend in Lafayette, Indiana, who opened doors for me that I could not open on my own because I was new to the area and I didn't know anybody. But this was a pastor who had been there over 25 years and was the assistant superintendent of the entire district and was extremely well known. And so he could, with just a few phone calls, open doors for me that I never would have been able to open on my own. So that's what I mean by sometimes we have lids that we need someone else to come alongside of us in order to lift those lids. But the problem is that few leaders let others lift their lids, whether it's through pride or arrogance, or maybe we just don't know, or maybe we're not able to be objective enough, or we're in denial. But those lids that we cannot lift ourselves, we need to get help and ask someone to come alongside of us. And so that really encapsulates the lessons that we've looked at this week, the law of the lid through the lens of Saul and David. Saul was the first king of Israel. David was his successor. Saul was the one who should have fought Goliath. David was the one who actually did. And David ultimately became a great king, expanded the territory of Israel significantly over what they had when Saul was leader. And then his son Solomon became even greater leader than David. And as we mentioned, and again, think about this, every king of Israel was always compared by God to David. When that king, hundreds of years later, was evaluated by God, you can find it throughout the scripture, it will always say, this person reigned righteously as his father David had done, or this king was unrighteous and ineffective because he did not act as his father David had done. And by father there, any you could be 10 generations removed, but in that culture you'd be considered a son. So that's what I mean by father, not just Solomon. So what a legacy that David left, because he was a lid lifter himself, and he had other people lifting lids for him that he could not lift his own. Yesterday, I think it deserves mention that we looked at Jonathan, who became David's lid lifter, because Jonathan was Saul's eldest son. And if you know anything about history in that culture, it was always the eldest son of the king who would be next in line. And so by all rights, Jonathan should have looked at David in a natural sense as his mortal enemy, as the last person that Jonathan would want to help. But instead, Jonathan became the one that actually enabled David to become everything that he eventually became. Because the truth is, Saul was doing everything he could to kill David, and Jonathan kept hiding him and letting David know Saul's intentions. So in essence, Jonathan was undermining his own father, who was trying to have Jonathan succeed him, because Jonathan had a sense that he just knew that the right thing to do, the godly thing to do, would be that David was the right king. And Jonathan even says, you, speaking to David, you're going to be the next king of of Israel, and I will be next to you. So what an amazing disposition that Jonathan had. And so he became a lid lifter for David. What an awesome sense of humility and a sense of knowing what your role is, and honoring the person that God had called to be king. So I think it's only right to mention Jonathan as David's lid lifter, who without Jonathan's help, David probably would not have even survived, let alone become king of Israel. And so with that, each week on Friday, we have a prayer that we would like to offer that kind of reviews the week's lesson. And so I'm going to share that prayer with you. It comes straight out of the book, 21 Most Powerful Minutes in a Leader's Day, on page 16. And it goes like this: Dear God, I want to be a better leader. Give me a teachable attitude. Then show me the lids in my life. Reveal character flaws in me and help me to repair them. Show me where I need to grow. And as I come up against lids that are outside me and beyond my control, please send me a lid lifter like Jonathan. I place myself in your hands. Amen. Make that your prayer today. And so let's talk for a little bit about how can we live this out. It's one thing to get these concepts, but it's another thing to walk them out. And so we take time on Fridays then to give you some very practical, hands-on direction in terms of how can I apply these lessons from Monday through Thursday. And so I'd like to share some application points with you that will kind of take you through this entire week. So number one, consider writing down, make a list of all the lids that you can detect in your own life. So just take some time, grab a pen and a paper, and just write down some lids. Now, some of these could be internal characteristics, which may include character qualities, leadership skills, relational capabilities, things of that nature. And then move on to external lids. These kind of things might be related to your life circumstances, to your age, your health, things of that nature. So you have internal lids and you have external lids. And so you write all those down in a list. And then what we encourage you to do is to sort the lids that you've just written, that list. I created a table, and I'll show that to you on the next slide. But take this list and break it out into 3 different categories. And here's how it will break out. Those of you with us remotely can see this. So I created a table with 3 different columns across. The first column on the left, lids I can lift. And a question that pertains to that particular category: how will I address them? What will I do to lift the lids that I can lift? Maybe you need to make a plan. Maybe you need to cut some things out or add some things on. Anything of that nature. You need to organize things. Any number of possibilities. So the first column, lids I can lift, with the corresponding question, how will I address these? Then the second column, lids others can lift. So the first column is lids I can lift. The middle column is lids others can lift. And the corresponding question to this middle category, who can I ask for help? Who can I ask for help? It kind of goes, and we shared this illustration before, earlier. If there's some level of expertise that you need on a given subject, then find someone with that expertise. I take my car to a friend, Matt. Matt is a master mechanic, and he was a Hyundai master mechanic, and that's the kind of car I have. So when I have issues that I can't figure them out, I call Matt, and Matt helps me get it squared away because he is an expert. And so that's the kind of thing that we're talking about, these kind of lids that you might have that you need help with. Find the person who's really good at that and ask them for their assistance. Now, we haven't really talked about this last column this week, but we need to talk just a little bit about that. We talked about lids that I can lift myself. The middle column of the table, lids others can lift. But there's a different kind of lid that we also have, and I call this column lids I have to live with. There are some things that we can't change. If I'm kind of short, at least my daughter would tell me that. She's here with us today. And so there's not a thing I can do to change that. That's something I just have to live with. There are some things that you know, perhaps some skills that you don't have, or that maybe just the way you're wired doesn't orient yourself that way. You might not ever really acquire those skills, or you have characteristics about you. However old we are, that's how old we are. We can't get younger, right? We wish we could, the fountain of youth, but it really doesn't work that way. So there are some lids that we have that we just have to live with. When I was raised as the youngest of 4 boys. Now that all of my brothers and I have reached either my oldest brothers have passed 60 and I'm in my late 50s, so this isn't an issue so much now, but when we were younger, this issue of me being the youngest was much more of a lid. They didn't look to me for advice. They didn't look to me to help them. They didn't really look to me as a colleague. I was a little squirt. And there wasn't anything I can do about it, at least not at that time. Now we're much more peers, but these are the kind of things that I'm referring to with these lids that we have to live with. Some things we just cannot change, and no one else can change them for us. So then one more item as it relates to this week's study. We not only want you to take some time to really reflect on the principles from this week, but the very best thing that you could do is to pass along what you have learned to someone else. So we kind of distill it down to a single question. Which one, leadership, concept, insight, practice, anything that you might have picked up this week in our 5 sessions together, whatever that might be, what will you pass on to another leader in the next few days? Note the time frame in there. Because when we are passing along to others things that we observe, things that we learn, then we help them grow as well as us. And what an amazing gift that we can give to other people, that while we are growing, seeking to improve ourselves, we can actually take what we are learning and share it with others. And so before we close our time out here in the next minute or two, I just briefly want to share with you what we'll be looking at next week. Next week, we're going to address the law of influence, which is very important as it relates to leadership. So the law of influence says the true measure of leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. And the biblical leader we're going to examine is Joshua, who of course is the successor of Moses in leading the people of Israel. And I'll share quickly with you the scriptures that will be used next week. Numbers chapter 13, verses 1 through 33. Numbers 14, 1 through 38. Numbers 27, 12 through 23. And then finally, Joshua, his own book, chapter 1, verses 1 through 18. It's been a wonderful joy for me, on a personal note, to share these studies with you. We're finished with week 1, and we only have 20 more to go. Aren't you excited about that? So we'll look forward to being with you all again next week, and to dive deeply into the subject of influence and looking at Joshua. And so you have the scriptures there. Hopefully you might have some time between now and Monday to review those and be fully up to speed. And I do want to remind you before we close that all of this week's lessons have been video recorded, and I'm working with my good friend Clint Betts to get those posted online. As soon as we have those accomplished, then I'll be sure to let all of you know via email that they're ready and how you can find them. So with that, we just say have a great weekend and God bless you.